Welcome to SunScream, a spooky evenings production. Welcome back to SunScream. Tonight's guest is New York Times editor's choice, Kate Reed Petty. Kate's book, True Story, has been flying off of bookshelves where audiences eagerly await her second novel. Kate has received awards from the Tennessee Williams Foundation and is a graduate of the College of William and Mary. Welcome, Kate Reed Petty. Thank you for joining us. Welcome back to SunScream. Tonight, my guest is Kate Reed Petty. Thank you so much for being here, Kate.
I'm so excited. Thank you.
My pleasure. And come out swinging with your first book, True Story. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you integrate into the book the idea of writing so hard as well. So the literary experience in and of itself is so intrinsic to the book.
That's very true. Yeah.
Is that because it's such a personal thing to you, because it's been such a personal thing to you for so long? I mean, what made you decide for this to be the first one, I guess, is the best way to phrase the question.
Yeah. I mean, the issue of writing essential to this book is because I have always been very interested in the idea of storytelling and what does it mean to tell a story. And so there were a lot of things that I'm just fascinated with in writing this book, that I got deep into the weeds of the process of writing and what is it like, what is actually the experience of, and I'm saying writing, but I think it's the same thing that we all do. Like if we're going to like send an email to a friend or post something on Twitter, I think the modern world has more and more opportunities to kind of present the story of ourselves to the world. And that experience is really human and also very like thorny, right? Like sometimes we get farther away from our authentic selves, the more we're kind of shaping the narrative that we want the world to hear. So I just find that fascinating, and not necessarily bad or good, but it is something that is a big part of our identities. And I really wanted to explore that through this book. And then again, through this topic, it is, the book is about rape culture and sexual assault. And I think that is one arena where this idea about storytelling and how do we decide to tell our own stories and how do other people receive stories is particularly acute, right? It's not different than a lot of other scenarios when we have to tell a story, but it is a very urgent and acute place where that storytelling issue, politics, becomes very big. Yeah.
Sure. So I guess since you've already alluded, I'm going to go out and spoiler alert, everyone. Herein will be spoilers. I don't know how to really talk about this book without spoilers, to be honest.
I'm excited that when you said that this would be a spoiler special or whatever you call it. I rarely get a chance to talk about the book in public like this.
Okay.
And not try to dodge around the spoilers. So
I love getting in the weeds with different things that it stuck out to me. One of the things too, as because we're doing our event live in the fall again this year, one of the things that I'm really interested in exploring with different people, and I want to explore some of the authors, including you, is this idea of the female gaze, which is not something that you talk about in terms of horror, particularly because horror was originally structured around a theoretical construct of the male gaze, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like now in the last, say, 5 years, you really see the female gaze come out strong in relationship to horror. And I would include True Story in that genre. So I'm curious if you've thought about that, if that's entered into your perspective in writing, and if you've observed it in other places, particularly in the horror genre.
So much, definitely. I mean, the book Men, Women, and Chainsaws by Carol Clover is one that was like really kind of like blew my mind and was influential in my thinking about horror, probably more about my own appreciation of horror rather than directly influenced to the book. But like her ideas about the male gaze are very like clear and interesting in the ways that that early horror films are, using like putting a young, imagined young male viewer into the eyes of a female victim to like experience that kind of pain is so interesting. But at the same time, and so I really believe her ideas, and I think they're just amazing. But at the same time, I have personally always felt like I could find interesting, complicated female characters having like experiences in domestic or romantic realms in horror movies in a way that you didn't see in a lot of other genres for decades before. And I think there are a lot of women artists and filmmakers and creators who love horror, and that's partly what they have loved about it. And so you're now seeing them play with those tropes and like with those ideas. And so you're seeing absolutely like, I mean, I think horror is such an interesting site of racial issue commentary, gender commentary, like social, capitalist critique. There's so much that you can put into that world. I just totally got very excited about that answer. So I'll stop and let you ask another question.
No, definitely. I mean,
but yeah, I think it's right. Like the female gaze is like, I think it's partly a reaction to the history of horror that we're seeing so many artists explicitly bringing, new lenses to horror.
yeah, because Alice, right? She likes horror movies, right? So she watches horror movies, and they are this. It's interesting. They remain this part of her identity, even though she experiences these very horrific things. I mean, she, in True Story, we get almost 4 different horror movies occurring at different times, and it's obviously the chronology is all mixed up too. So it is fascinating that you sort of like you play on some tropes, you create some new ones, you create some new devices. Obviously, I mean, I'll get to it more, but like the time with Q, obviously, to me was the most horrifying, and then the potential of the sequel toward the end of the book was even more sort of like, oh god, yeah. So yeah, it is interesting because I mean it's one of these things I think is still situationally trying to find itself in the genre too. It's
like the female gaze,
yeah, because I mean I'm interviewing Rachel Harrison and Omakatsu too as part of the series, and they have this unique voice in that realm too, just like yours. And I'm beginning to pick up more and more things because I'm really trying to understand it better myself, because it is sort of structurally new in terms of like a theoretical discourse in horror.
Yeah.
And so I'm fascinated. I don't know if you've heard of it. There's this film that came out last year called Violation.
No, I haven't heard of it.
It's on Shudder if you want to check it out. It is about rape culture as well. It's all predicated around the line "No, don't stop," which I'm trying to say as flatly as possible.
Interesting.
Because the two people have different perceptions of that line.
Interesting.
And you see both in the film. You see his and you see her perception of that line.
Interesting.
And then it turns into like a very dark revenge fantasy for the majority of the film.
I mean, it's interesting. I'm interested to check it out because it is such a thorny thing to think about how to, like, I think with any sort of issue of trauma, thinking about how to make art about that experience without like exploiting it or recreating it or something. And I don't think there's like an easy answer to that question. That's something that every artist has to wrestle with. But yeah, I do think that, and I think one of the things I've thought a lot about with True Story is that showing the different perspectives, I think, is sort of what you're getting at. Like, how do you sort of like get an audience to understand multiple different characters, different perspectives, so that they can maybe like be open to those kinds of perspectives in real life? I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you get you get these variations on a theme, right? Obviously there's an experiential level in which depictions of non-consensual sex, rape culture get depicted. Right, one way I think about films like Irreversible.
Sure, yeah.
Right, and I mean, it's a very hard thing to watch, right? But then there's a much different sort of like visceral reaction when you're reading a text like yours, and you just see like the legacy of it, which I feel like filmically, or sometimes if it's a male author, it's over and done. It may be referred to in its violence and in the past tense, but I feel like in a book like this, it's always in the present.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's important about the book, and I wrestled with sort of figuring out how much time to spend on the, and again, like in the book, it starts like the first thing you hear about is a rumor, like, so you never actually sort of experience the scene of the assault in the book. But I think what I really wanted to kind of look at and kind kind of tease out is just the different ways that, like you say, like the story kind of continues in these characters' lives. So really the book is not about, that night in high school so much as it is about how the story of what happened gets interpreted and gets skewed for different people's perspectives, how some people try to like Haley is sort of trying to, in a way, kind of building her career on that. And like her intentions are, good in some ways, but you could also see her as kind of exploitive. Nick also sort of is like unable to see it. And yeah, so I guess it goes for me again back to that issue of storytelling, and almost like because I'm endlessly fascinated with things like how does any filmmaker decide to make irreversible, right? And like how is that okay, and what is that?
Yeah.
What's that? Where's the limit of that? And with this book, I wanted to kind of look at that conversation, mostly that the legacy of the story, as you say. Yeah.
No, it's interesting. I mean, because in some ways, your book is a ghost story in that way, right? Because this thing haunts people for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, definitely. No, and and like the Lost Weekend section, when there's this character, when Nick is like in the woods. I keep forgetting that audience will have read the book specifically, but when Nick is in the woods, he's sort of literally, haunted by, is it just his guilt, or is there like literally something that's haunting him? And I was really playing with that idea of like that Stephen King quote that's like a little treacly, but about ghosts living inside of us. So I was like, oh yeah, that's really true for him in some sense. Yeah.
That is one of the stranger moments. I mean, not to jump too, the middle of the book. Yeah, I mean, when he's out there in the woods alone with a mix of sobering anxiety, to pardon a pun there, versus a compulsion to guzzle down bourbon. And then you're not, it's interesting because it's like, is it a cult out there? Is there a ghost out there? Is there, all kinds of weird possibilities. That's, I think it was interesting because that's, again, as I say, you have these sort of like silos of different horror stories. Like that one could have been a short story unto itself in a lot of ways.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, Nick is a fascinating arc of a character in the book. I mean, he probably changes the most in a lot of ways. I mean, he's so predicated about what happened to high school, even though most of like his behavior and his high school experience as a whole wasn't that great.
Right. But he doesn't see that, right? Like he like sees it as like I think I see Nick as the character who's sort of like, he sort of started out the most deluded, and so he had the most to kind of learn through the course of the book. And then yeah, that is kind of like, it's interesting that one of my favorite things about this book is talking to readers about it and just hearing people's different interpretations. And there are a lot of different possible interpretations of the book, which is partly on purpose, right? Like there's things that you can interpret a lot of different ways. But like the fact that Nick has so much real estate and so much kind of character development is something that is on purpose, even though it feels weird to be like a book about rape culture, that there's this sort of doofy guy who doesn't get it, takes up so much time. But his his growth is part of what I hoped, for readers to sort of take away. And then with the twist at the end, then it's sort of a revelation, is that he is more of a vehicle than he is, the focus of attention, that Alice is putting attention to him on purpose because she does not want to be the center of this story. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, also too, something you didn't hammer at the book, which I thought was quite good with him, is, the fact that he has a daughter, in the latter part of the book. And, it would have been very easy to have hammered on that being sort of like the impetus for a lot of this social change in his mind, but you didn't do that,
Right.
You continue to allow him to make horrible mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, there's that cliche of like men saying like, oh, well, I have a daughter, or I have a wife, or I have a sister. That's how I think about, that's how I think about feminist issues. So yeah, that's a little bit of like an in-joke. Like I wanted Nick to be like, yeah, he's got a daughter, but that doesn't mean he's figured anything out.
Yeah, I mean, he continually fails in so many spectacular ways.
Yeah, he's such a sweetheart. Yeah.
I kept thinking of Al Bundy. Married with Children.
Married with Children. That's really funny. That's really funny.
Like as his life like degraded into like this sad basement dwelling that he.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing you get interestingly with is the voice of a high schooler that I thought was
Mm,
interesting, because you do find so many different distinct ones. And
yeah.
obviously I teach 18 to 22-year-olds roughly, and I feel like you, particularly of the 90s, right? You captured this voice of the 90s high school kid, that's so different than
Thank you.
today's.
Yeah. Yeah, it is funny because I talk, whenever I talk about this book, I'm sort of talking about, what is high school culture like, but this is such a specific slice of like one suburban kind of milieu of high school kids. And, it's right before, like, I think like they have like a couple of the teenagers have a cell phone, but it's like the very first one. And it's like, they're sending those text messages where you have to push the numbers to get to
Yeah,
the
you
right
put
letter.
to change the letter. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And
We had
like,
pagers. We didn't have cell phones.
the pagers, oh my God.
That's what we had. If you were fancy, you had a pager,
That's so funny. I
and
think
then
I
you
was,
went and used the payphone.
yeah. Where did you grow up at?
Coastal Virginia.
Oh, okay. So like roughly mid-Atlantic, a little more southern than me, but yeah, that's really funny. But yeah, it was very like, it's specific to the teenage world that I grew up in. And so,
I
my
think we're
sense,
about the same age, actually.
I bet we are. Yeah. But I do feel self-conscious talking about like high school culture because my sense is that it is so radically different now, which, thank God. But yeah.
Has he read the book?
Who's?
Has your son read the book?
Oh no, no, sorry, not my son. I have nieces and nephews
Oh, sorry.
who are all like, early, they're sort of just going into high school now. So
Okay.
um
I mean, you have to think about it too. Like a story like this set today, it's just like it would spread like a bizarre contagion in a much more sort of quick and damning way.
yeah, it would be a totally different book for sure. I mean, there are some interesting. I mean, there were some really awful cases. There's a great movie called Roll Red Roll that was a documentary made, I think 3 or 4 years ago, 2018, 3 years ago, about the Steubenville, Ohio. It was like three football players were like photographed carrying an unconscious girl after a
Oh yeah,
football
yeah, yeah,
game.
yeah.
Like, and it was sort of one of those cases where they were like the video evidence was so horrific, and also, the boys involved were, it sort of shocked me because they were sending the video to friends, and like they sort of reminded me of this book because they had no sense of how damning the evidence they were kind of freely sharing. Like there was this ignorance to their glee that was really, reminiscent. I think that Steubenville was 2015. The documentary was made a couple years ago, but I think it was there. So it feels like late to me, but it's still pre Me Too. It's still, I think it was a case that influenced kids. So hopefully, I don't know. I really hope that like young people are seeing rape culture more clearly and are moving past it, and um, you know that the kids like Nick have more space to not just like stand by and think that this is funny or cool or something.
I
But
was
I don't.
rewatching. I'm sorry.
I was just say I don't know what it's like.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just glad I'm not part of it, I guess. Uh,
Yeah.
no, I was rewatching The Craft last night, actually, of all things,
Oh,
and I was thinking about that because the earlier scene of him lying about having sex with her, with Bonnie,
yes. Yeah.
and the way that rumor spread in a similar way, you know.
Yeah. Totally. And that was like a very particular mark. And that's yeah. It's funny. I just rewatched The Craft too, and then there's also like an assault later in the movie when
Mhm.
there is a Balk's character disguises herself
Yeah,
as the main character to have sex with that guy. What's his name? Skeet Ulrich. Anyway, all the characters,
yeah,
all the actors are like blast from the past. But um, yeah, yeah, like movies have a fundamentally different view of rape culture now, which I feel like that has to have some amount of influence on what teenagers are doing.
definitely. I mean, it's because I'm working actually on a book on 90s horror,
Oh,
and
really? Cool.
yeah, and my first chapter is just on the Coppola Dracula, and I'm
On
just
the
like,
Coppola Drive. Oh, I love that one. Yeah.
and I'm just like, this could never be made today. This is insane.
Wild film. It feels like a music video or like a yeah, that's a wild film. I like it.
Yeah. But I mean, there's a lot of non-consensual sex in that film.
Yeah, which is kind of the Dracula like old taboo. What is your the thesis of your book?
I'm reading the Me Too movement back into the 90s in that chapter, as showing it as evidentiary of what was happening but not being discussed.
Interesting. Yeah. Through and then
Um,
through is that through the entire book as
no,
well?
that's just that chapter. The second chapter is on the Clinton administration and actually witches. So it's called Clinton's Witches. So I start off by talking about the Monica Lewinsky, Jennifer Flower stuff, and then I turn then I talk about the Craft and the Crucible. And I
Interesting.
basically situate Bill Clinton as John Proctor, which makes an adultery and everything. And
Interesting.
then I finish with the Blair Witch, and I essentially espouse that Hillary Clinton is the Blair Witch.
Mm.
And I talk about her Senate run and relationship to it. I also use this book called 90s Bitch as part of it, and the idea of bitchification. And I make it clear that bitch and witch are the same thing in the 90s. Then I kind of just go through a litany of times that are called these terms. Then
Yeah.
chapter 3 is on Doma and horrifying families, largely Interview with a Vampire,
Okay.
as a queer family.
Yeah. I don't know. Defense Marriage Act. Right.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then I finish with a chapter called Specters of Race, which is ghost stories of race. So it's Candyman, Beloved, and Sleepy Hollow, then compared with sort of like the legacy events that happened in the 90s that we now just see reemergent as these hauntings in the summer of 2020.
Yeah. Super interesting.
So that's my 90s. My childhood that I absorbed and didn't understand what I was absorbing at the time, which I'm sure you know.
So much there. Yeah, for sure.
Have you heard the phrase 90s kid? That's a good question in terms of this.
I have. Yeah.
What do you consider a 90s kid?
I guess it's sort of like I guess it's a particular mix of like cultural references, like that feeling of like, oh, I had a beeper, or I had like this kind of cell phone, or like I got on the internet with AOL. Yeah,
Do you consider yourself a 90s kid?
yeah, definitely. So I was born in '84, so I was like
Okay.
graduated high school right at the end of the '90s or at the early 2000s. So I definitely had all of that, and my brother and sister are older than me. They're like 7 and 8 years older than me. So I also had a lot of like Gen X cultural influences. So there's also the, like the Nirvana, I was too young to actually listen to, but I did because of my big brother, like that kind of thing. So
okay, I'm glad you define it the same way, because like I'm finding that people born in like 97, 98 refer to themselves as 90s kids. And I'm like, how in the world are you a 90s kid?
Oh, they think of it as somebody born in the 90s.
Yeah, it's like
okay.
Because they have a nostalgia for something they didn't experience. They find themselves to be 90s kids. And I'm like, I don't think that's correct, because I don't consider myself an 80s kid. Like I'm aware of the 80s and things, and as you said, the Gen X stuff and like, early MTV, but it's not because I experienced it in a meaningful way. It's because it was there,
Yeah, there's that JG Ballard. There's a JG Ballard quote from the Atrocity exhibition that I always think about. And I think he's talking about Disney World, but he basically says like, we're like, and I'm going to butcher the quote, but it's like, we're hungry for the new, or desperate for the new, but disappointed by anything but the familiar. And that's why we recolonize past and present. And so everything in culture gets kind of like chewed up and then homogenized and flattened out. And I feel like that's what's happening it's happening with the 90s right now, in the same way that it happens every generation does it to the 80s and the 70s and the 60s. Like, this is just what humans do, is we like look 20 years earlier and they're like, that's cool now. And we're going to like fetishize these movies or these music or this, like these ripped jeans. And I don't know.
It's Friends. My students are all obsessed with
People
Friends.
love Friends, exactly.
Like, I didn't watch it in the 90s. Why would I watch it now?
Yeah, it's a funny thing. But there's just something, I don't know, there's just something comforting about like revival, I think, for humans. Yeah.
That means this awful time period is going to be revived at some point in our lifetime.
100, and it's going to be such a flattened, like weird version of what right now is, It's
Yeah.
gonna be just like Dua Lipa and
People are going to wear face masks. And...
yeah, maybe. I don't know about that. I feel like that could get, well, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I won't get into the tragedies of the 90s and how they
yeah.
get recycled, but
Well, that's the thing. Like the actual like terrible discourses that were around
yeah,
get ignored, and I think that's rather fascinating too.
yeah, I think that's
So,
true.
In terms of again these like the silo stories, for lack of a better phrase, that I'm
Yeah.
coining around your book. So you've got the high school. You start, as an adult. Obviously, you know where your books. You start as an adult, writing a horror script, and then you transition into really a high school time period. As I said, the time period I found the most distressing was the New York time period.
Mm-hmm. With Q, you mean, or the ending?
Yeah, with Q. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's so cinematic too.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen or read Perfume, the Story of a Murderer?
I haven't.
That's the first thing, because he is obsessed with redheads.
Okay.
And he's killing them to make this scented perfume that drives people insane, but he needs to kill a certain amount of redheads to do it. That's all I kept thinking of the entire time. I was like,
when was it made?
Huh?
When was it written or made?
I can't tell you off the top of it. Sometime in early 2000s.
Okay. Years. Okay.
Yeah, Dustin Hoffman is in the film.
Wow. Okay.
It's kind of a forgettable film. The book is beautifully written. It's horrifying, but it's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'll check it out. Yeah.
Yeah, the movie is the concept is interesting. It's a hard one to depict on screen too, because you can't smell the thing. So
yeah. Oh, that's an interesting challenge.
Yeah, I mean that's the challenge with anything like that, right? Like I point to The Great Gatsby a lot as being unfilmable because we don't feel the way he feels about Daisy.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah, and I mean that's really important. But if you're reading it, you can get there.
Yeah.
But if on screen, it's likely not to happen.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But anyway, yeah, I mean this one is because it starts so slowly. It's the old salami tactic, sort of thin slices, until you have nothing left, and it's just like I don't even know where to begin with it, because it's I had a friend at one time who, the beginning, it could have devolved into this. Like I saw this happening in a relationship with a really close friend, and the friend also went into that relationship with this sense of her having the power role in that relationship. So I was recognizing it very quickly, and I knew it was going to go horrible.
Yeah.
Because I'd lived through watching it in person. Yeah. And I'm just, I don't know, that had to be a hard area to write. I have to speculate on that.
The voice, one of the things that's really important about the book, or that was important to me in the writing, was the different voices in each section. And the voice in that section is really what carried me through. So, Alice, and by voice, I mean like the writing and the syntax and the words she uses. And so that sort of section, the conceit is that she has just, it opens with her emailing her friend Haley, and she's fled New York. She's fled this relationship that you get the sense something has gone horribly wrong, and she like needs a place to stay. And then the story of that relationship is all told through these emails. I'm just recapping to like,
yeah.
I don't know, people have read it, but as she's writing those, I was thinking about somebody writing an email on a phone, basically, right? And sort of writing short sentences, and also kind of somebody who is kind of like hiding from something and suppressing something. And so she never uses the subject if she can help it. So every sentence, instead of saying like, I got out of bed, she would just say, got out of bed. So there was this kind of like clipped quickness to the writing. And that emerged intuitively, but then as I was writing, I realized that also really matches her state of mind, because she's literally in hiding. And so the voice, like as she's writing, she's also removing herself from the very sentences that she's writing. So it's this sort of sense of like running away and being in hiding is very key. So all of that long preamble just to say that the voice of that felt so like powerful and right. Like as I sort of like hit on that and was hitting these emails, that really carried me through the plot, if that makes sense. Like that, like
Sure.
she's, you know, and that section too is one that you can interpret many different ways. And all of this book, I leave open to interpretation. And what's important for me is that readers sort of do the work of deciding what things mean and what they believe and what is sort of true, quote unquote true. But so that section felt like, yeah, I don't know, the writing felt like an exercise in storytelling that was very kinetic, even as it is sort of this really daunting thing to happen. I felt like almost possessed writing it. Yeah.
Because it reminded me a bit too of Vertigo.
In that section
Yeah.
specifically, yeah, I could see that. Yeah.
Yeah, just
That's a
the
huge
idea of like,
compliment.
but you know, Vertigo obviously troublingly like the Stockholm syndrome kind of thing takes hold.
For sure. For sure.
I mean, you obviously know better than I do. I mean, I don't know what Q's end game here was with her.
You don't know
With
what?
Alice.
Sorry?
What Q's end game with Alice was per se, like
Yeah.
like Norman Bates. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's probably something I would leave up to readers to like decide.
Yeah.
Be curious what your theory was, but yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess the overarching thing I kept thinking about was this is what his thesis really is.
Mm,
It's like some weird experimentation he's doing here.
yeah. Yeah.
Because there's a play called The Shape of Things,
Oh, I don't know it. Yeah.
where a girl does this. She's an art student and she finds a guy and she basically just slowly makes him do things he wouldn't do.
Interesting.
And they just become bigger and bigger things.
Yeah. I mean, that's a human, like that's sort of like a like flaw in the, not flaw, but like that's a bug in the human system is that we like are able to manipulate each other and are also like susceptible to manipulation for sure. And like that idea of control in relationships, I think is always present to a degree. I think a lot of like old married couples are like their marriage is just based on fighting for control. And that's, you know, obviously a very different relationship than the one depicted in the book, but all of those dynamics are in all of us and then become, you know, unfortunately really destructive in the wrong combinations and with the wrong, you know, a person's poor motivation. Yeah.
Because we see him, I mean, obviously toward the end, we see him reiterating what he was up to, but we see like toward the beginning stages of it again.
Yeah.
With whomever he's living with at the time. But he's still obsessed with Alice.
Yeah. Yeah, she's the
And
one that got away, you know?
yeah, because you start wondering, it's like, Jesus, are there like bones somewhere? The ones that didn't? Like, that's why I was saying Norman Bates, right? I just like this taxidermist quality.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think, yeah. I was gonna
Because I
say
mean, she becomes like a living mummy, you know. I mean, the way I'm envisioning her, you know, running out of the apartment.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I was thinking, like there are a number of like horror film kind of like inspirations behind that section, I would say. So like the new girlfriend when Nick meets when Nick goes and meets Q and is in his apartment and there's a new woman who's got her red hair. Her name is Kira because of the ghost in The Sixth Sense who is poisoned by her stepmother. So at the end, I think the Haley Joel Osment like goes to this funeral and then
Plays the videotapes.
Yeah, exactly. So Kira is the name of the girl who like that ghost girl. So I was like thinking about that kind of version of like you know, like one horrible thing. Like there's definitely some like Rosemary's Baby feel to it. There's I'm blanking on the other ones that I had, but I feel like this idea of like poisoning and control. And again, the thing I wanted to say too is that you're always getting the story that Alice has told you in this book. And so something that's important to think that I think is, that I sort of push people to think about is the way that you are in Alice's storytelling world with these sections and deciding what that means to you is I think.
Well, you do cash it pretty hard by calling it true story.
For sure, but it's like it's kind of ironic. It's like true story, a novel, right? Like the whole thing is also fiction. So
sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that was I wondered about it too. I'm just like how much of it was confessional on your part.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny how people um, want to uh, read into the author's like life in a novel, and because it is fiction explicitly. But I will
Well, I
say,
think too with the end section, particularly in this book, right? It makes
yeah,
it feel like you were trying to assert more
with the
with it.
epilogue, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it makes it sound like it's more biographical.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, so to me, I feel like um, the entire book is framed. There's the prologue and epilogue that is in Alice's voice, and she's a character. She's explicitly like having written this whole story. It's funny. The original title, like the working title of the book, when I sent the manuscript to my agent, was women's fiction,
Hmm.
which I loved because it was like a play on genre, and it's like a play on the idea of like women lying. Right? There's this myth of the false rape accusation that kind of has gotten blown out of proportion, and then the there's also just like the literal idea that this whole thing is a work of fiction that Alice has created, and that you're in this woman's fiction. So I was really attached to that title. I felt so like in love with it for the longest time, but it was too. It's like a little inside baseball in the publishing industry, and then also I had a lot of men friends who were like, honestly, I would never pick up a book that was called women's fiction. Like, unfortunately, the stigma of that type of that genre is real. I think Jeanette Winterson, there was a Twitter thing where she like burned some of her books because she felt like they were being marketed as women's fiction or something. Like, there's this real kind of like stigma around that idea of the genre.
Well,
So
it
the
comes too with the whole like documentary idea too within the book.
the idea of like
A true story
they were.
documentary, but still like the idea of like it being in a framework kind of structure.
Yeah, no, and so true story. My editor came up with that title, and I just loved it. I was like, okay, this is a compromise that can work because it's like kind of a noir-y, right? It's like it sounds to me like a kind of a like I don't know. It sounds like a thriller in some ways. Um, it's like there is that kind of wryness to it because it's true story, a novel, and what does that mean? And then it also feels like something that Lax Bros would say in the beginning section, like true story, bro. Like there's this sense that if you say like true story, you're not even like who would say true story unless it's like you're exaggerating or lying or something, right? So there's even like a little bit of like mistrust in that kind of emphasis. So yeah, it feels like the title is like it is meant to make you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, obviously perceptibility, as we talked about, is a huge thing. And we talked about the Lost Weekend idea of like
Yeah,
complete distortion of perceptibility. And I mean, you shift narrative voice around that too, right? You go from Alice to Nick's, and that's obviously
definitely.
not possible. And then
Definitely.
you reveal to us Nick doesn't even exist.
Yep, yep, yeah,
So betrayed.
yeah. Did you feel betrayed at that? Yeah.
No, I I'm trying to like recollect exactly what I was feeling at the time. He was an interesting character. I felt bad for how bad things got for him because I wanted other people to suffer more.
Yeah,
And I
yeah, it's
didn't
a
see
little
why
bit.
he needed to quite suffer as harshly as he had to. I mean, it's very apologetics kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Uh,
Interesting. Yeah, yeah. I mean, he is like, you know, I mean, a little bit it comes from the horror genre too, right? Like characters in horror novels suffer, or in horror movies, like horror is a genre of suffering, and like I'm interested in the ways that I mean, it's funny that it does make Nick's. It's one of the things that I think makes Nick likable. Like I really like Nick, even though I was sort of I didn't expect to like him that much when I started writing this like doofy teenage lax bro who was like just trying to like fit in with his team. I was like, I'm gonna hate this guy, but he's so he does suffer, but he still like keeps wanting things and he keeps trying and he keeps kind of like believing that he's gonna be better. And so in a sense, I think again, he's like a creation of Alice. And so there's a little bit of a sense of this, like, he's like a white guy who gets infinite second chances. Like he always thinks that he's gonna like get a consulting job at his mom's, through a connection from his mom, or he's gonna like, he can get a bartending job or something is gonna come through with him. And I think there's a little bit that like she as the author of Nick, like resents that kind of relentless positivity that he has. And even when but then it becomes sort of absurd, right? When he's like living in his friend's basement and like can't really afford a subway to Manhattan. Like he still like thinks he's like on the way up, you know? And so I don't know. I think it's part of what makes Nick kind of sweet and likable, even though it
Yeah, I
is.
mean, he does have that weird everyman
Yeah.
quality. I mean, like very down to your luck everyman, I guess. I mean, at the point you're stealing your mom's car to go to a cabin in the woods where you're breaking and entering.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, but he's like, no, it's fine. My mom is gonna forgive me, you know.
yeah, and
So,
then he wrecks the car.
I know.
Oh my god, dude. I mean, it almost became like comedic there. Like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
whole violence becomes very I've been rereading some of Christopher Triana's stuff because he's coming on. His stuff is super gory because he's in that splatter gore
Got it.
category
Cool.
of horror. And he actually sent me his book before he sent it to his editor, his next one. And so he's like, you know, forgive all the grammatical errors. And I'm like, I grade college stuff, you're fine. But
Yeah.
yeah, I've read some gory stuff and preparing for the series. But I'm just trying to imagine, you know, cutting off your fingers and trying to get yourself to the hospital.
Yeah, it is. It is funny that like you say, I do think that section is funny. And I read that section sometimes at like events when I need to do like a 10-minute reading. I'll do the beginning of that. And
Okay.
it always sort of surprises me how people laugh. Like I know it delights me and I'm happy, but it is sort of like
Yeah, because he's like Wile E. Coyote at times. I mean, yeah.
yeah, exactly. No, and a lot of my favorite, I mean, I like Ready or Not is like a great example. I just watched You're Next again, which sort of does this, but like those like slasher films that are also comedies is such a
Yeah.
funny specific genre, and it's weird to say like it's fun, but it is. I think it's really fun. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's interesting. I mean, because Alice, you know, Alice is also long suffering in the book,
For sure. Yeah.
and in different ways with different people at different times. Um, and so it's interesting because the point of contrast, of course, is Haley.
Yeah.
And I mean, if there's a character that's persistent apart from Q, which I mean,
Yeah.
Q was like a vampire, so it's like hard to think of snuggling up there. But I mean, Haley is the one I think my ire gets directed toward as a reader most frequently, which is
Yeah.
interesting because I mean, she never really does anything wrong to warrant that, you know.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
she, as you say, she is a little exploitative.
yeah. I mean, like she is a complicated character, and you know, I think like friendship is complicated, right? Like it's hard to be friends with people, and I think often friendship is about supporting friends through difficult experiences, but then we all do get to the point where we sort of want to shake somebody, or we want them to try something different, or it's like, you know, go to therapy, or try this exercise routine, or you know, something to kind of fix people, because I think it's hard for us to see other people suffer because because we don't want them to suffer, and then also we're like afraid that we will also suffer, and so there's this sort of human impulse to be like, if they would only fix it, it would be better, therefore I will be safe. And I think that's just like another sort of like a bug in the human system. So I think there's, you know, I don't think Haley is a villain, and I think that there have like that kind of complicated relationship is something we all have with people in our lives. But I did want to explore, you know, she, in a way, she's like a little bit of a counterpoint to Nick, because she sees the sort of like she sees rape culture so clearly, and she's sort of like throwing herself at this problem, but she is she, you know, I did an interview yesterday, and we were sort of talking about the narrow roles that society kind of tries to fit people into, and Nick is like trying to fit into a very specific version of masculinity. I think Haley is trying to fit Alice into a very specific version of what it means to be a survivor, and what it means to kind of like process any kind of trauma. And you know, the book is about Alice rejecting that box completely and saying, I'm not going to do it your way. And you know, I think that's just you know, I think it's definitely pertinent in issues of for survivors and assault, but also, you know, I think it's true for all of us, is that especially old friends kind of push us into tiny boxes, right? Like they really kind of make us who we were when we were hanging out in high school or college. And so it's not that Haley is a bad person, but she is a certain kind of like societal expectation, the same way that Nick is, and Richard is too.
Richard. He's such a weird character because I mean he's probably the one I feel empathy for first, but
Oh, that's so funny.
also the one I don't feel any for by the end.
Yeah, it's so funny. I've talked to a couple of men who have that experience. My experience of Richard is like completely different in the beginning. Like I can understand the like I can understand the like feeling empathy for him in high school.
Well, you have a horrible pun here that I don't know if was intentional because you're
What
essentially
is
saying
it?
Dick is gay at the beginning by having it be Richard
Oh
is
yeah.
gay. So you're literally saying Dick is gay.
Yeah, no, so he is like the focus of so much like homophobic, like toxic masculinity for sure. And like, yeah, his port like he is called that on like his asshole teammates call him Dick on purpose, of course. But but yeah, at the same time, like he's still like a guy who's like sees himself as the victim of this kind of like horrible rumor that's gotten out of control and like isn't able to see that like he can't see his own responsibility for it, right? And then can't see his like think about like the private school girl and what happened to her. But I don't know. I think that's just I feel like I'm saying like if you're wrong, and I don't mean to say that you're wrong because
No,
I
I
think
mean
that
it's experiential, and I mean again, it like I say, it's like sands in an hourglass with how I feel about him.
yeah
He's well stocked at the beginning with goodwill because you think that perhaps he's going to be the one that comes around, and then toward the end you realize he's the one who came around the least.
yeah for sure.
And I mean, a lot of it is just like incidental privilege that entered into his life, or that he starts off with that people like Nick don't have.
Yeah
And he's afforded these things because I mean one of the interesting points to me here is like how early on a mistake in your life can actually carry on throughout your life, no matter if it's intentionally malicious, as is in the case with a lot of the characters, or if like in his case it's just trying to fit in and trying like the peer pressure aspect of it is still sort of this thing, and just how the legacies of it,
yeah
and through like even ones you may not even recognize, because I mean he becomes obsessed with it too.
yeah it's true. But I think he's definitely an example that he gets away scot-free like after that actual happens. Like he continues to sort of lead his charmed life. And that scene I always think about is where he's like everybody thinks he's going to go to the Naval Academy. He's like, no, I'm going to Princeton. I changed my mind.
Right.
And there's that sense of like, oh, like this guy is really on his way. And I think he is an example that when like you're right, like he hits this point where he's like, gosh, I feel terrible about this thing that happened. I want to reach out and I want to like make it right. But he's got such a skewed idea of what it would mean to make it right, and such a
Yeah,
like
it's a dollar amount
idea. Yeah, a dollar amount, and also just like another lie, right? Like it's like a trick, a con.
Yeah, well he only wants to make it right for himself, not for her.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well said. Like he wants to alleviate his guilt without like bringing it up. So,
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, because she wants an authentic apology, right? He just wants to pay her off and doesn't even want her to know who he is. So he
yeah,
tells the weird dismemberment story.
that's right.
It's funny because I just reread The Hunger, and
Oh,
so like dismemberment is in my brain right now.
it's always dismembering is always appropriate. Yeah.
But yeah, so he is this, and you don't expect him to come back. It's interesting. He exits the stage, and you think he's gone. I mean, the same thing with Q too. Like these two sort of like, I guess the two most privileged men in the book.
Yeah, that's
Um,
actually a good point. I hadn't thought about that comparison between the two of them, but they are the most. Yeah.
well, they're also the most insidious and the most villainous
hmm
by the end. I mean, Q is, well, I guess not by the end of the book for Q, but
Yeah.
he also has like a Wile E. Coyote moment at the end.
The falling in the
Yeah.
basement stairs. Yeah.
Which, I mean, you needed that kind of catharsis, I feel like.
Yeah, that's something. I used to live in New York City, and that's something I was always afraid of, is those just like walking down the street, and sometimes those will be
Yeah,
open.
like where they load the groceries into restaurants and
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah.
exactly. And normally the doors are up, so they kind of block the hole, but sometimes they'll be
Some are
completely
just
open,
open.
or it's just gone. Yeah, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh God, yeah.
No, I've been quite a few times, and I've almost fallen down into because I'm clumsy.
I
So
think it happens. I used to. Somebody I heard one time it was like 8 people a year die falling in those, which is like a
Seems like a
small.
really high percentage of people dying from that.
I think it's small in like percentage of New Yorkers, but any amount feels terrifying, right? It's like shark attacks are terrifying, even though they're
Yeah.
like this. There's not like 8 people or whatever. Feels like nothing, but yeah,
I mean, I think we could be fine that he dies, though.
yeah,
Probably save somebody's life as well.
yeah.
He becomes so strange too. His physical evolution is sort of like Marlon Brando's,
Hmm.
right? It just like becomes the creature that eats him.
Yeah, yeah. No, and I mean, he is again. It's like this is Alice's horror story, right? Like she has written this to she. I guess it goes back to like she's using like the you can interpret it different ways, but she is thinking about horror as she's writing that section for sure. Yeah.
And I mean, he just, I don't know, like a weird chase. You got a couple of like these chases. I mean, like when Nick gets cold cocked and wakes up on a park bench, for instance, right? That's
Yep.
another one of these strange thriller chase, because you do skirt that. You do that dark fiction, horror fiction, thriller
Yeah.
line that is interesting, especially because the 90s are so prevalent to it, and the 90s was really redolent with that kind of thing because horror decided to remarket itself as thrillers and
Yeah. Yeah.
Silence of the Lambs in the 90s.
Right. Right. No, and that's also that like a lot of that last when Nick is in New York and like doing odd jobs for Richard, that is like it's there's a lot of like noir influence in that as well, both like Raymond Chandler style noir and then also kind of neo noir playing with those things that came more late. But the original, like the voice of that originally was, so it changed a lot and eventually landed in second person. But the very first beginning of that, I was thinking about like a Raymond Chandler style, like gumshoe detective. And then I got a little bit more Jim Thompson as it got like a little darker and a little bit more intense. But just thinking about that originally, like Sam Spade, like I'm like a hard boiled gimlet eyed
Yeah.
guy down on his left, just like trapped in this story. So I feel like the getting hit and blacking out is like a solid noir trope for sure.
Yeah, and
But
it's contrasted very noir-like with his alcoholism.
yeah, same thing for sure. Yeah.
um I'll tell you, the maddening part of the book was the college acceptance letter, or the college
Oh,
essay section. I mean, you have to get through it. That's the thing. I think you hit like different points of it, and what it does is it creates the feeling of it.
mm,
And that's why I said you have to get through it, because if you don't take the time to do that, then you don't capture that feeling.
yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. Did you feel like there was like a certain amount of just like getting through that high schooler writing style
Any
or
sort of writing process. I mean, because as I'm sure you can relate to, right? You get notes back, you get drafts, you miss stupid things. You don't always agree with the notes you get back on writing. I mean, so it's not just a college acceptance essay; it's writing itself. I mean, like
yeah,
it's almost a giant metaphor for the act of writing in that section.
for sure, for sure. And like deciding and the college application essay is such a time when you're like you have to define who you are like that's such an important milestone of like I'm going to tell my story to a stranger and it's going to determine my future, right? Like that's such a weird artificial experience of storytelling. And so yeah, I'll confess that's my favorite section of the book, and it's the one that I feel like most tenderly towards. And when people are like, oh, I loved it, or like a lot of people it makes them cry, I'm like, this is what I was hoping for, because I really feel tenderly towards that section. But yeah,
But
just
it's so writerly though, because it's also this expectation of what people want you to say
exactly, which is
versus what you want to say.
yeah, and like the ways that like we both figure that out. We have to figure that out for ourselves, but then also the ways that we get feedback and we get influenced by people who that's like, oh, the way that I was going to say that is not right. I have to do it something different. And like, yeah, I think it's very tragic how Alice gets like that's sort of the first big moment in the book where she gets kind of silenced or kind of driven down and like told not to tell her story.
It's a
Yeah.
strange teacher that she's got, or tutor.
Yeah, yeah. It was fun figuring out how that like how to do that marginalia in the sides of the page, like how to actually get the teacher's comments printed. Because in most books, you don't have like handwritten comments in the margins. So that was like one of my favorite parts of the publishing process, was like working with the publisher to be like, no, it has to be like, we need a better font. We need to do it this way, that kind of thing. Yeah.
I mean, it's nice that they let you play around that much too with form.
Yeah.
Because I mean, you get a couple books of late, that do that. House of Leaves, probably most famously, but not all that many. And I like that level of experimentation.
It's my favorite thing for sure. Yeah, and it is tricky. It's interesting too that the book came out in the UK as well, and the UK publisher used my handwriting in the
Oh,
margins. So
nice.
I sent them, like, they sent me the right size, and I hand wrote it in to send back to them. So there's different ways to do it, right? Like publishers can figure stuff out. But yeah, that's just so exciting to me. Like we have such I kind of hate House of Leaves, but I am excited about the idea of like, we have such specific expectations of what a book is or what it should be. And I love when something kind of breaks that mold. There's a book called Pale Fire by Vladimir Nabokov. That's one of my favorites. I don't know if you've read it, but the book it's basically a poem, but you start with the sort of foreword, and it's the annotator's note. And it's basically a neighbor has stolen this poem from a famous poet who has just died. And the neighbor is leaving footnotes to every line of the poem, like interpreting the poem, but actually telling his own story through these footnotes. And just that the experience of reading this, of just like a hijacked text that is then being misinterpreted in front of your eyes, to tell this story from kind of a madman, is it's so like, it's just, that's the most exciting thing to me. I love when books like kind of break out of the box. Yeah.
So some more generic kind of question here. Why, I mean, you picked lacrosse for the sport that they
Yeah.
play. And I mean, I just have to wonder why. I mean, you avoided certain cliches by using lacrosse, I feel like, but
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it was big in coastal Virginia, but it's in Maryland. Continue now. It's like, it is a very big sport, and it is sort of I guess I just sort of had those stereotypes of, this is like, there's a certain kind of privilege and yeah, a privilege to a lacrosse team that made sense to me.
right.
And it is too, like it feels different than a football team, I guess, would be the
Yeah.
sort of cliched expectation. And I'm trying to struggle to explain why, but there's what it is. I think that I associate lacrosse with money. And so there's like the extra layer of privilege on top of that, even though football is, it's different
Well,
everywhere.
football's much more ubiquitous. Like my high school didn't have a lacrosse team. We had a football team.
Yeah, it's everywhere. And there's, like Friday Night Lights, there's like stories of like huge football teams. Like I get that. But yeah, lacrosse felt specific to the place. And I guess I just knew more about it as well. Yeah.
Okay. Well, because you do have that dynamic between like public and private school that goes on. I mean, obviously, being alluded to as private school girl is.
Yeah, right. And that's like such a specific, like, kind of suburb, right? Where like the private school is like, the public school is so well funded that the private school is like, can be seen as stigmatized for something.
Yeah, I mean, the private school in this book is like the land of misfit toys. It's not.
Yeah.
Like you're there because something went wrong in the public school, not because it's per se better.
Right, which I'm sure is not like blanketly true, but like for Nick's perspective, that's sort of like his sense of like, yeah, I'm at the best school in a 10-mile radius. Like, of course I'm in the right place. So
yeah. I'm trying to think. It's funny because the book is not in a chronological order, and we've been all over the place out of order.
Yeah, right.
Talking about it, which is kind of funny.
Right.
Yeah, so in terms of Alice, we talked about, it seems like you do share a couple of things with her. You definitely seem to share her love of having watched horror films, like growing up. Was that the case? You said you had older siblings too.
Yeah, I did. And my older brother makes horror movies. And so I definitely always had this feeling of like, I want to, like, it's cool to watch horror movies. Like, I want to do that. I am a little bit of like I do watch them through my fingers sometimes. Like I do get very scared. But I love the feeling. And I think Alice has a line in there that is pretty much true to me. That it's like the feeling when I've finished with a horror movie is like, oh, I made it, and I feel sort of like adrenaline and exhilarated and excited. So I do love them for sure. And it's been fun the past couple of years. Like as the book has been coming out, I've like spent some time revisiting old favorites and like classics that I had like never that I had missed. I just watched The Brood recently, which I had never seen before.
Cronenberg.
Yeah, which is like, I mean, like you want to talk about like an autobiographical fictionalized story, like that is a wild one. But yeah, I do love horror movies, and my spouse is always he's asked me to like start closing the door when I watch a horror movie, because he'll like come home from the gym and like they'll be screaming in the house. He's like, what's going on?
So what's a favorite of yours?
A favorite, man, I just one of my favorites of recent years is I love Karen Kusama. I love her work, and she made a movie called The Invitation.
Okay.
It's just barely horror, but it's a very like kind of creeping dread kind of sense. It's about a man and his new girlfriend go to a dinner party with his. Have you seen?
I have seen it. Yeah.
Okay, well, for the viewers, he goes to a dinner party with his ex-wife and her new partner, who maybe are in a cult, maybe not, and like it's just this kind of like intense dinner party. I definitely love the horror movies that are about like some kind of grief underneath it or something like going on. I also I loved Ready or Not. Yeah.
Okay. Have you seen I Trapped the Devil then?
I haven't seen I Trapped the Devil.
You should definitely see that if you like that kind of
Okay, cool.
familial grief kind of thing.
Yeah, it
and
does.
Also A Place So Dark and Wicked or something like that.
It's So Dark and Wicked. Yeah, okay.
I'll look that up and send that to you. Get the right
Please
title.
do. Yeah.
That came out this past year, and actually that was quite good in that regard too.
Awesome. Yeah, it is. Horror is like, I have sort of classics favorites, like Suspiria and like Deep Red. Like I do love like Argento, and like I like kind of weird classic super gory horror, but
I can see that you bore the palette too in your
yeah. In the book, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now that you say that, I see the palette of
that's super interesting. Yeah, no, there's definitely like a there's something about like a highly stylized horror that feels very good for this kind of like metaphor use or something. But I was just gonna say that I'm like so excited about how smart horror has gotten in the like past few years, and how many people are doing like aggressively interesting things with the form. So
okay. I ask everybody to tell me a horror blasphemy.
A horror blasphemy.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Do you have an example?
Mine is always Halloween 3 is the best Halloween. The masks are there.
That's amazing. Gosh, I don't know if I know enough to blaspheme horror. I hated The Witch. I'll say that. The one that was out a couple of years ago.
Blasphemy to me, yeah, 2016.
Yeah. I felt it. Yeah, and probably it's blasphemy to say that I hate House of Leaves also, but The Witch felt.
Yeah, that was that was shocking.
I'm picky about things, I guess.
Okay. Why do you hate The Witch?
Oh, I felt like it wasn't scary, and I get a little annoyed when things like the ending didn't feel exhilarating to me that I think it wanted to feel. Like it felt like, I don't know, it felt like it was just like it felt sort of meaningless to me in a way that I didn't love. You know?
I'm also obsessed with the score from it. So.
Oh, okay, that's fair. Yeah. No, and it's like, and I respect the we are using the boards that were milled in that time, and like our camera is like sculpted from old nails or whatever. Like they were like that authenticity. I like that rigor, but it didn't do it for me. So.
Yeah, I mean, I do like The Witch, but I that kind of stuff doesn't. I'm like whatever on that kind of thing. It's like if it looks good, it's a good story. I'm with you. Yeah. So what are you reading now?
I just read a fun thriller called The Plot by Jane Hanff Korelitz that I can kind of plug. But the book I'm halfway through right now is called Insurrecto. It's by an author named Gina Apostol. It's not horror, but it's about film, which is kind of interesting. It's about the main character is works as a translator, a Filipino American translator. She's gone home to Manila, and a American filmmaker who's the daughter of a famous filmmaker comes to Manila to film a film that she wants to do. And so these two women meet and have this sort of transactional relationship about like, is the translator going to help this filmmaker get to this remote location to make her movie? And then the translator starts rewriting the filmmaker's script, and so the whole book becomes kind of like a war about storytelling between the two of them. So it's very much, I mean, as I sort of started our interview talking about storytelling, it's a book very much in that world. Okay. And very much in the world of like storytelling through movies and what do movies mean to us, which I love. So like books about movies I find like thrilling. Yeah.
Right. Nice.
Yeah.
Is there a particular book you're looking forward to coming out or reading, or?
What is coming out? I'm blanking. I did recently read my first Brian Evanson and have fallen down, and the book that I read was called Last Days. And I've fallen down a little bit of a Brian Evanson, like I've been reading about him and like profiles of him online. So I am excited to read more. I don't know if you're a fan and you can recommend the next one, but
my stack of reading could probably hit the ceiling right now that I have to get done by the end of October. So
yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Anything that you recommend or that you're reading right now that I should check?
I mean, I'm looking forward to My Heart is a Chainsaw, which I think a lot of people are. Being online a lot, you get a lot of buzz about it.
Yeah.
I think I have read Final Girl Support Group, so yeah, I mean, those were probably the two fiction pieces.
That's great.
That my brain was at. Because I actually already interviewed Grady for the series. We haven't aired it yet, but Stephen Graham Jones is going to be on in October.
Great.
So yeah, I'm really I'm really looking forward to that one.
Yeah, I just read The Only Good Indians, and like that's an excellent recommendation as well. It's fabulous. Yeah,
everybody is just obsessed with that one. I feel like I've not heard anyone say that would be a blasphemy if somebody said something bad about that book, because I've never heard that. Yeah, I might read The Deep now that I just reread Hunger, because I really liked that. Cool. And actually Rachel Harrison's new book Cackle too, I'm looking forward to. Awesome. I'm interested to see what she does with witches, because I don't know if you've read The Return, but it was pretty witchy. And I'm always interested in seeing where people take those things. What's next for you?
I'm working on a next book, which is a little bit of a haunted house story, I guess, is the most that I'll say about it at this point. But there's definitely like a haunted house at the center of it. So
that's good. I always like a good haunted house.
Yeah, I was like, it feels kind of classic, but that's what I'm interested in. So yeah.
I think that genre is coming back around. I think the haunted house genre is really seeing a resurgence of late.
Yeah, I could see it. I mean, for me, I'm like thinking about history. It feels like a haunted house is such a classic American site of like historical reckoning, and I think it's right for this moment.
Yeah. Is there a future beyond just tangible books for a true story?
So I have sold the TV adaptation rights to it. I think I can say that out loud. It hasn't been public or anything, but it's not a secret. But so we'll see if it actually becomes something or not. But it was very exciting to get that.
Well, congratulations there.
Thank you. Yeah, it's exciting to get like a little bit of to imagine a future for it, because I do think the book would be such a different. If it did become a TV series, it would have to be radically different than what the book is now. And I told the producers as we were talking about it that I was like happy for it to like flip inside out and do something new with, playing with genre on television is a different thing than in a book. And so we'll see, fingers crossed, burn some candles and draw some pentagrams for me.
Yeah, we had Matt Ruff on last fall while Lovecraft Country was being broadcast. I think
Wild.
episode 3 was on when he was on our show.
What was the experience like? Or was he like just kind of
He was happy. I mean, I don't know if you've read the book or watched the show, but like they're very different. And you know, each one has its merits. There are definitely things that happen in the show I wish they had kept from the book. But I mean, there's a character particularly that dies and it doesn't die in the book, and I'm just like, there was no purpose, like even cinematically, there was no purpose for that.
Yeah.
But you know, contrastedly, there's a whole like Korean arc in the TV show that I thought was better than what you see in the book. So I mean, there are it was give and take. He seemed happy with it. I mean,
Yeah, I
he's
bet
getting
so.
that HBO money too. That
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. Yeah. I feel like it is nice to like Watchmen was so interesting how like they
Ooh, now you're really treading into dangerous
yeah,
territory.
I guess all I mean is that it's like it's cool to think about. I don't know. I'm not a fan who wants things like recycled completely exactly and like just want to see the same thing over and over again. I think it's interesting to think about TV as a new art form or a movie as a new art form, and how do you sort of retell the myth going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I imagine particularly with true story, you have like certain feels and certain points that you want to corely get across, but then there's more flexibility to it.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like I think the story is the same, right? Like Alice's story and like her creating this thing is the same, but you know, you can't really make a TV show about somebody writing their college application essays, right? Like you can't like make somebody write a book. So it's like
I think you could montage it pretty good.
and then you've got like 5 minutes of 2 minutes of television. It's like you need to like I'm interested in that because the important thing in that section is Alice trying to tell a story and then being like shut down. And so rather than just like watching somebody try to write that down, how do you do that through like how does an actor do that in 20 minutes as opposed to in like however many pages that section is? But we'll see. Probably it won't happen, and we don't even ever have to worry about it because everything in Hollywood dies. So
I don't know. I mean, it's funny just talking to people, you know, obviously I've talked to quite a few authors at this point and just hearing different perspectives on the whole process, and then you know the book being picked up and then it like being shelved for a while, then it like gets revived, you know, just
yeah, because that happened with Lovecraft Country, right? Like it was a long yeah
it was definitely in development hell for a while. No pun intended there. But yeah, I mean, even talking to Grady about things, like I think Horror Store's been in development for a minute.
Yeah, it's a slow business for sure.
Well, I mean, writing a book is too, though, right? And get it. I mean, from sitting down to write the first word to touching it.
It's true. It's true. It does take a while, but at least you can like move it forward every day. Whereas I think my experience of Hollywood is that you have to just like sit and wait for for several months, and then like Glenn Close calls or not that that's happening, but in the ideal world, Glenn Close calls, and then you're like, okay, now I'm ready to go. Yeah.
She and I had the same college advisor.
Did you go to William and Mary?
I did.
I went to William and Mary. That's so
You went
cool.
to William and Mary?
I did, yeah.
I feel like we should sing the alma mater.
I probably can't.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
We were there at the same time, that means.
You and me?
Yeah.
What year did you graduate?
05.
I graduated in 06. Yeah.
See, so we were actually at William and Mary at the same time.
That's weird.
That is weird.
I feel like we should have known that before we did this whole conversation.
I know. But then we would have just talked about William and Mary for like way too long. that is funny.
Yeah.
Because we talk about lacrosse, I do think about William and Mary.
Yeah, there was a team there, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, for sure. No, of course. And I'm thinking.
What did you study then?
I studied English. Yeah.
I studied English.
Of course. Yeah.
We probably were in class together. You realize this?
That's nuts. I can't believe that. Did you take you didn't take any writing courses there? There were only like a writing course. Yeah.
No, I was English and theater.
Oh, were you? Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
Actually, we had Lori Wolf on, who was a theater professor, or is a theater professor.
I took a playwriting class with her. Yeah.
Yeah, so we had her on during the fall. She did a talk on freak shows.
That's so cool.
Yeah, you probably like Suzanne Raitt.
Yeah, I remember
Yeah.
her. Yeah,
Did you take James Savage? He taught Shakespeare.
I did, and I think that I packed up his library as like
Oh
a
wow.
English assistant job one semester.
So I was in his Shakespearean tragedies class, and this is very him. He would lock the door from the inside
Oh
when
my
he came
gosh.
in and close it. But I missed the first 2 weeks of class because I had mono.
Oh God.
And I remember him this thing saying, "Mr. Jarvis, mono is not an excuse for missing my class." That's how I remember William, because you were there during the hurricane too. Then
That's right. That was a
when we had
wild
to go on
fun.
Saturday and Sunday and make out class.
Did we? The only thing I remember about that was that we left campus and had no idea when we would come back.
Yeah, we got the
We were
email
like,
like, "Get the hell out."
evacuate and we'll let you know when you can come back. And it was like 8 or 10 days. It was a long time.
It was almost 2 weeks.
Yeah,
It was a really long time because all those trees fell down.
that's right. That's right. That was a wild time.
That's so crazy.
Do you remember the I know what you did last semester flyers that were on campus?
No.
That's so funny. It's funny that was a there was that time, I think it would have been I think it was 2004, 2005. There was several rapes reported on campus in the space of a couple of months. And one of them they were unrelated, and yet like, it was something that was really upsetting. And I don't want to get the facts wrong because like people, it's not like super fresh in my mind, but one of the cases, it was like charges were brought and then dropped because it was sort of a he said, she said, like, party drinking type situation. And the police dropped the charges. And some people on campus took that as evidence that like it was a false rape accusation, right? Like, obviously we know now that charges are dropped for many reasons that are not always valid. But at the time, so a couple of, I think they were anonymous, but we woke up to campus one morning and somebody had just put flyers all over the campus, and they had named the victim or named the woman who had made the charge and said, "I know what you did last semester," and basically like accused her of lying, like explicitly, but had like covered campus in these flyers. And it was it's this weird thing that like I remember it happening, and then the way that almost nobody I know remembers it. Like I kind of barely remember it, and then I've done some research to kind of like refresh it. But it's just this weird thing that I guess, I don't want to dive back into like our whole conversation about rape culture, but the kind of like perpetual amnesia about these things happening. It was amazing to realize like, oh, there's this happened on our campus and then kind of just fizzled away. And I've always just been so angry about like whoever it was who was like, I'm going to show this girl, like I'm going to humiliate her and like tell everybody her name.
I don't remember this at all. I do remember like the 2 years before you would have gotten there, because it was the year before I got there. A fraternity lost its charter because of just like basically being roving marauders attacking random people.
Yeah, and William & Mary is such like it's not known as like a big frat school, but the frats were awful. Like they were really, really bad. But yeah, I also just that the horror movie reference on that one flyer has always stuck with me as well. Like it was such a lame, like it was just like a lame joke, but also weird that they like chose a horror movie to kind of make that point. Yeah.
Huh. Yeah. That's so we'll give William & Mary a positive now. What's your favorite William & Mary memory?
There was a ghost tour that I loved. My friend Adam Stackhouse, did you know him?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Adam used to give ghost tours around Williamsburg. And one time, and one of the things, there was the Lady Baltimore house. I'm gonna blank on the name, but the ghost tour was that you would like knock on the door and she would like knock back, or you would hear her footsteps or something inside the house. And so Adam would do this thing, and a couple of friends would like run to the back of the house because there was a door exactly on the opposite side. And so we would listen, and you could hear when Adam knocked, and then we would like scream from the other side. So that would like give the ghost tour a scare because they would like think they were hearing the stuff. And we did it one time, and we were like hiding behind the house, waiting for Adam to knock. and this figure just walks across the path, just like the shadowy figure. And we were like froze and then realized it was a cop. And we were like, oh no. And the cop like, and we were like, maybe he can't see us, but of course he could see us. And then he goes, are you all scaring a ghost tour? And we were like, yes, we are. And he's like, have fun. And just like let us do it. Just like blatant privilege of college students for sure. But I just like always remember that being like, yeah, we're like trespassing to scare the ghost tour. You know.
Right. Did you complete the triathlon?
I didn't jump in the Crimdell, but I did
You did the other two?
yeah, the jumping the Governor's Wall and streaking the Sunken Gardens, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Did you?
I did.
Oh man.
There's a golf cart in the Crimdell, in case you weren't aware. I found out because I scraped the crap out of my leg.
Oh. I think that's why I didn't jump in the Crimdell.
Oh, I mean, it's nasty, isn't it? It's like it's not.
Yeah.
It's a bog. It's not like a pond.
Yeah.
It is a bog.
And it's not deep enough. Yeah.
When was the last time you were on campus?
I went back. So Adam runs the Global Film Festival there,
Okay.
and I've went back. I guess 2 years ago, the last time I taught a workshop this year. It was all online because of COVID, but last year, 2020, I think it was in February 2020. So I think it was
Okay.
before.
So you've seen all the changes to campus.
Wild, yeah.
I didn't even, because I lived in Dillard my last 2 years.
Yeah.
And that whole area is things now.
Yeah.
Because I got lost back in there. And like I used to live on this road.
And there's so many more buildings. Yeah. Is it a bigger school now?
I don't know if it's got more students. I know it's a lot more expensive.
I believe that. Everything is. Yeah.
So, wow.
Wild.
And we were there. What's actually killing me is that we were there at the same time.
No, it's really funny.
We just had like a class reunion on Zoom.
I'm sure this has been fascinating for everybody.
I know. It's like conversation devolves into
Yeah. You know,
So
Adam
wow.
Stackhouse. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how, but I do know that name.
Yeah.
That's so just strange. Well, thank you very, very much. I enjoyed it, and I'm still sort of like shocked by the like 0 degrees of
Yeah.
separation between us.
For sure.
That's so funny.
This has been great. Thank you for having me on.
My pleasure, and thank you all for tuning in. And as always, stay spooky. Thank you for tuning into SunScream. Tune in next time for Alma Katsu, author of The Hunger.